Thank you guys for having me here today. I would venture to assume I'm a little bit of an outlier with this group topics you usually cover, but I think you'll see pavement management kind of ties in quite nicely with geotech. Obviously, we reference the geotech reports when we do pavement design, but even along the lines of pavement management, collecting the data is sort of the first component, and that's usually followed up with backing up recommendations with some geotechnical investigation. So that will be kind of the highlight of my presentation today. So I'll go ahead and get started. I just wanted to give some background, as some people might not be familiar with what do I mean by pavement management. And really what we do is, go out and help cities and municipalities and, commercial property owners rate in a kind of a scientific based means of rating and assigning a condition index to their pavement. And so a lot of times people that don't have this data, they'll say, well, my roads are good. Well, what does good mean? And so by assigning an actual established, value to that, you start to speak in numbers, and it becomes more clear when you compare roads on a side-by-side basis. So pavement management in a nutshell is going out and collecting the data. That's what I mean by the condition report, seeing what's out there, doing an assessment. And then you have the next step is sort of, what tools do I have to address the roads? What funding should be involved? Sort of the analysis of the data. And then really the ultimate goal is using that to plan, timely maintenance and projects. Some people might be familiar with CIPs and cities really putting a plan together for, hey, what's our 5-year outlook, 10-year outlook? When should we mill and overlay? When do we need to do a reconstruct, and using the money we have wisely? So, kind of a buzzword in my niche and industry is, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. Like I mentioned, people saying it's good, what does that mean? So, this data really gives people in like public works, city planners, tools to help plan on a network level versus driving out and, having a resident call and say, hey, my road's falling apart, giving them the tools to understand that. So what we collect when we do this is what we call a pavement condition index. Some people call it an OCI, an overall condition index, but it's a rating on a scale of 0 to 100. 100 would be a brand new road that doesn't have any distresses present in it yet. It hasn't cracked. So that's a perfect 100 rating. And then as you get more distresses showing up on the roadway, you deduct from that value. So you see kind of the scale that's here. Having roads that are under 20, 30 for PCI, those have reached a point of failure and need something a little more robust and costly, like a reconstruction or a reclamation done in order to improve that condition. So really the point, you see this graph on the bottom here, you want to catch the roads before they reach the point of no repair and try and extend the life of that pavement with something less costly like a mill and overlay. So we follow here at Terracon ASTM 6433 as our means of inspecting the roadways and parking lots. So we go out and rate a road and measure everything based on what's on the roadway. So measuring all the linear cracking, potholes, patching. There's a slew of distresses both for asphalt and concrete that you type into, there's different programs like Cartograph, Paver, Icon, that you can input this data in the programs themselves, calculate this PCI for you. So it's a really unbiased way. I don't assign it a rating. It's based on the data that's out there. So as I mentioned, the more types of distresses, the higher the severity level, and the more, 100 feet versus 10 feet will increase your deduct value, and you start decreasing from that 100. So you can see these 5 pictures I have. A PCI of a 97 has, very few distresses, whereas the bottom right here, a PCI of a 7 is really, high severity alligator cracking, a lot of patching, and I'll walk through some more examples. But I did want to highlight the different means of collection. So kind of the way the industry used to run in the what I'm calling the old fashioned way, is doing it manually, which there's nothing wrong with that. It's more time consuming. It's a little less safe. We're out, walking in between traffic. On higher speed roads, it's a little bit harder to do safely. but you go out there with a tablet and type everything, measure everything. The way the industry is moving is more to drone collection, vehicles. MnDOT has their Pathways van that they collect this data. So they're going more towards the automated data collection of this information. So as I mentioned, I'll walk through a few examples. So this is Excelsior Boulevard. This was rated a 100. You can see it's in pristine condition, no distresses present. Here's a road that's rated an 87. In the upper corner here, I have the distresses listed, so you can start to see now we have some linear cracking showing up. This road's rated a 71, so we're starting to kind of hit that teetering off the edge point where, it's starting to get a little older, more distresses are showing up. And I want to point out, a road that has a lower pavement condition, it doesn't just mean it's old. It could have not been designed appropriately. It could have more traffic related issues and heavy loading than it was designed for that could cause premature failure. So pavement condition index doesn't always correlate to age, but in a lot of cases, the older it gets, the more distresses start showing up. So this road had a lot of linear cracking. We're getting into block cracking and fatigue cracking. And really these surface radians are kind of us reading between the tea leaves. So fatigue cracking, for example, can tell the story. A lot of times that's indicative of a subgrade failure, but it could also be from repeated heavy traffic loading can cause that alligator fatigue cracking. So that's why we partner a lot of this information with a geotech investigation to help determine what lies beneath the surface and kind of back up our recommendations. So here's a road that's rated a 45. You start to see the distresses becoming more apparent. There's some block cracking showing up, higher severity linear cracking leading up to that rating of a 45. This is rated a 26. You can kind of see, I know the sun's shading it a little bit, but if you look down the road here, some patching. This has maybe been chip sealed previously and that's worn off. There's alligator cracking that's maybe been masked by some of the patching. So we've reached a point that a mill and overlay might not be the right option anymore. It's maybe too far gone that would be cost effective. And then here, obviously, same situation. We've got a lot of heavy alligator cracking, that high severity linear cracking. So sometimes, there's issues that impacted pavement, drainage issues, just being old. So this is kind of the background information. I've kind of breezed through the pavement management side of it. Now I want to get into how we partner this with geotechnical information. But these next two figures just show you can take these radians and put them on a map and put this tool in the hands of, like I mentioned, a city planner, public works director to say, hey, here's a snapshot of where the good roads are. The good roads that are rated on this map in blue, a 90 to 100, those are in good condition. They might need a surface treatment, some crack sealing. The roads that are red jump out. Those obviously have failed and need a robust fix, but look at those roads that are a green and a yellow. There's maybe a chance to salvage those roads, and getting those for timely maintenance would be useful information. And like I mentioned, it's not just municipalities. You can do this for, commercial sites. This happened to be a school district, but you can break up the lot into different segments. Where's the parking stalls? Maybe there's a concrete portion that's designed for heavy, like loading docks, for instance. Those would be rated as a separate segment so that the radians aren't blurred. You like to set up these investigations by logical segments so that you're not rating, a brand new segment would be 100, and this 500 feet of a road has failed and now your rating is a 50. That doesn't really tell the whole story when really you have a perfect section and then a segment that's failed. So as a first step to these, it's important to break up the segments into logical components. And then this graph is, I've seen this quite a few times in different forms, but basically what it's showing is you can design a road and walk away from it, right? And it's going to fail, kind of following the trajectory of that yellow dotted line. You let it go and a road could last, maybe 20 years. Sometimes you design roads for longer than that, but let's say 20 years. The point of using this data is to do timely maintenance, like this graph shows, seal coats and overlays to try and extend the life of those roadways. We're talking 20, 30, 40, 50 years with proper maintenance implemented. So this data is again used to determine which treatment is best. And in Minnesota here, it's one of the leading states with research, and there's plenty of tools in the toolbox. You know, MinRoad's always investigating, MnDOT as well, but different treatments, you know, under seals are becoming a big deal, microsurfacing, different treatments to try to extend the road, the lifespan of a road at a lower cost. So, okay, what everybody's been waiting for, how can forensics help with this? And these are just some examples I've come across that I kind of save in my folder just to pull out when needed. They're kind of the interesting cores I've come across in my background. So we had a road that you can see on the left picture here. If you stood back and looked at it, it kind of was cracking the way you'd expect concrete slabs to crack, but it was an asphalt road. And so we did some cores to see what was happening underneath. And sure enough, there was crushed recycled concrete below that asphalt that was kind of rehydrating and re-solidifying and forming the subgrade to act as a concrete slab. And that crack pattern was then reflecting through to the surface. So doing a mill and overlay out here wasn't going to prevent that crack pattern from happening, but going out and removing that recycled concrete was a better solution. So I do believe that's what the city ended up doing. Another reason that isn't maybe front of mind, but also important when you talk about forensics, sometimes you open up and expose what lies beneath. This was a project locally here that we sent a coring crew out, and we had comments coming in that their fingers were getting tingly. And we sent environmental folks out, and what happened, they had discovered coal tar buried beneath the surface. So that project was then paused, and the right environmental people were brought out to remove that safely. And sometimes that's not preventable. So in that case, one option could have been to mill and overlay and therefore not expose that material. But once the fix is in and a reconstruction is needed, that's going to be brought to the surface no matter what. And so that needed to be handled safely. I mentioned drainage earlier on. Sometimes you just have a lot of clay, wet, non-draining material underneath the pavement that needs to be corrected. That tied with, you know, adding more crown to a roadway to get the water draining is also useful when you come to the design. But, you know, sometimes if you don't have good draining material underneath, that needs to be part of the solution as well. Forensics can help, you know, let's say I asked, you know, a city public works director, okay, sure, we have 6 inches of pavement, but what if it looks like this? Can you mill and overlay this type of road? You know, a recommendation would be to at least get through those 3 debonded layers where you're dealing with the structure that's bound together. You know, some people might be familiar. If you have layers that aren't tacked and bonded together, they're really performing and carrying load in separate sections. They're not acting as one uniform pavement structure. So having that good layer and making sure the layers are bonded together is important. So a recommendation here, you might be able to mill and overlay this, but the recommendation would be to at least get through that first, you know, I don't have the number, maybe that's 2 inches, and reestablish a good bond between those layers so that your pavement structure acts as one. And then sometimes the pavement is just old. I mean, you know, pavement doesn't just age. The surface, what happens is it dries out and oxidizes. The sun dries out the binder from the surface and leads to micro cracks, which leads to more cracks, and it just dries out. It's like an analogy of sunscreen, why you put sunscreen on your skin to prevent wrinkling. Think of that as the same purpose of a chip seal or fog seal on the surface. You don't want it to dry out and become brittle. But sometimes as the pavement ages, you get the bottom aging, working from the bottom up, where moisture in the structure, you're losing a lot of the fines and binder, and it just kind of becomes weak. And so a recommendation on these type of roads is maybe something like a reclaim or reconstruction. The concern being, if you mill off, you know, a good portion of that crumbled material, the rest of that will just crumble when the mill is brought in. And so you're really not paving over a sound base. You'd be better off kind of buffing up that subgrade and making it stronger. Again, I kind of went over this one, but look at that. There's no bond between that lift at all. You can see the clean shear, you know, break there. So that pavement was never acting as was designed. It's really acting that top, 1.5 to 2 inches is carrying a lot of that load. So this is why we really emphasize tack. That's something that's kind of looked over, but you see how important that is and how prevalent that can be in the examples I've showed of these cores. And then when I call for cores to be taken, I like to take them over cracks. Sometimes it's important information to know how deep do those cracks go. A lot of cities are concerned with reflective cracking, where you would mill off, 1.5 or 2 inches of pavement, put a fresh, clean surface down, and in a year or two, all those transverse cracks just reflect right through the surface. But if we know from these cores, all the cracks are really confined to that top 1.5 inches, maybe if we do a 2-inch mill, we will eliminate a lot of that reflective cracking. So that's why it can be important to core over the cracks themselves. And then look at this core on the right, you can see how deep cracks can go. And then that middle picture there, how many segments and really, groups of pucks are built up over time. And then on the left here, you've got a pavement that is still performing quite well for as thick as it is. That you could do really anything you wanted to that pavement. You could do a mill and overlay and be supported by all that underlying pavement in really good condition. I also mentioned on this slide, another reason to core is to look for things like fabric and geogrid. That's probably something you guys are more familiar with. And geogrid and fabric, I know, has been used as an interlayer. One concern we'll point out is, cities that are building that from the start, something to consider is if you ever want to reclaim a roadway, sometimes reclaimers, that's not an option because that fabric gets tied up in the reclaimer. And so, that's just a long-term concern of, if you reclaim with fabric down the line, or if you build with fabric down the line, a reclaim might not be an option. You could still mill and overlay and reconstruct a roadway that has that in place, but it does make it difficult to reclaim. And then I just wanted to highlight other things that go into pavement management and things I work with as a pavement management and pavement engineer, having GPR data, FWD data, geotech reports are really helpful when we design a pavement, having that R value and knowing what's underneath the surface and what are we building upon. And then, doing material testing and environmental. These are services that we have at Terracon, but also things that are important to have in this industry and things that I think a lot of people on this call work with and provide. Kind of just a shout out and a thank you, because that information comes in handy and it shows how these two tie together, right? So I often lead in a city or work with cities to do pavement management that a lot of geotechs might not be involved with or know that exists, but you can see on the back end how a lot of that brings work to a lot of geotechs and helps cities when they get to a feasibility stage, help them make decisions. I maybe glanced over, but we've had a lot of cases where they thought a mill and overlay was the right treatment. And when you take cores and understand the overlying condition, instead of going down that path and getting to a design and so far down the process, they can, reassess and go in a different direction. And so it is a huge cost savings to know what you're dealing with and not be surprised at the last minute. So, there. I think that's all I had. I can take any questions now or wait till the end of Brian.
All right.